Hello, 7th grade math students. Today we're going to extend our thinking about proportion into a scale drawing project. So this is an introduction to the scale drawing. First, I need you to choose a piece of clip art, maybe a simple picture or a logo, something that you're kind of fond of but isn't too detailed. That way we're going to be able to use some very careful points and connecting to turn it into an enlargement. These are some supplies that you will need. Besides your clip art or your simple picture or logo, you want to have a pair of scissors, a sharp pencil or pencils, an eraser, it's a must, we'll probably make some mistakes along the way, and don't forget a ruler. And it's most helpful if your ruler includes both centimeters and inches. Here I have included a few examples of some clip art that I think would be good possibilities. I think most of these have been attempted by students in the past. These are just images that we were able to find online. Some of them are a little more detailed than others. So a few cautions. Whenever you have two detailed cartoon figures, like here Garfield and Odie, you're kind of signing on for a little extra detail or work. So this might be a little more involved than something simpler. I also want to point out it's okay to have more of a real life image if you choose, but in this case he's got kind of dark markings here on this gorilla, so for that reason it might be a little bit difficult to locate important points. It's probably possible, but again, you might want to steer clear unless you're really up for a challenge. Some more basic ideas would be more like this iguana who has very definite dark lines on the outside. Or maybe this rainbow unicorn, because I see the definite pronounced lines, kind of like an outline without the inside details. This one wouldn't be bad, but I'm not sure I would be detailed about the spots. I might give it my own version of spots when I'm ready. Goofy, maybe you would just choose a portion of Goofy. You might just do his top torso to his hat. And here, of course, Fred Flintstone's doing a dab for us. So this probably isn't too detailed, except when you get into maybe this hand kind of crossing. So anytime you see smaller details, that kind of means you're going to have to be even more precise to deliver the message or that image in an enlarged scale. For my example today, I found a quick piece of clip art, kind of resembles a young monkey, and it's really just the face of that monkey. And I'm going to show you how we would get started. So there's a lot of excess space on here, and even if your image has a background to it, that's something that we might trim out. I'm not going to get super close to the dark edges. I can leave a little bit of a border of white around this, but I really want to get a little bit closer to the main image so that I can focus on just that for my enlargement. Next step, if you notice I've trimmed off the excess area here, so you might be trimming off a background. You're just going to focus on the main part of your image. So for me, that's just the monkey's face. The next step would be to decide which grid is going to be best for you. So this 1/2 inch grid is pretty close, except that I notice that a little bit here goes off the grid. I might either have to trim this down, or I might choose a larger grid to make that work. Well, looking down below here, I have a centimeter grid, and I think that this will work just fine for our activity. So, oh, yep, I could really place this anywhere on my grid to make it start or to make it work. If you notice, I probably don't want to put it smack dab in the middle, and I've had students do that in the past, but we're kind of learning from experience of other students and how to make it better. So I would encourage you instead to crowd the bottom left corner. So I'm going to actually crowd in this direction, the bottom left, because this really represents the origin, if you will. If I'm graphing points, I'm always going to start from the origin and move on either on the x-axis or the y-axis. So we want to kind of treat it similarly. In fact, I'm going to ask you to put a star here in the bottom left corner. This origin is pretty important, so I've starred it. The next thing we need to do is make sure that this is secure. So I'm going to ask you to get out your glue stick, and with a real quick couple of dots of glue, we're going to try to stick this down. And again, we're going to try to crowd the left-hand corner. I'm not going to touch the black lines with my image because I still want those grid lines peeking through like they are. I can still see grid lines on all sides. Just a little bit of glue. Notice I'm using glue stick, and I get to decide if I want my image maybe tilted or if I really want it going straight. I think it'd be more interesting to get it tipped a little bit. So I am going to tip it just about, oops, can't do it that way because I can see the grid lines would be covered all the way at the bottom. So I'll tip it just about like this. So a little more interesting in my opinion than just a monkey face. It's a monkey face tilted. And notice I was crowding the bottom left corner or the origin. Now that I have this glued down, my next step is really to complete the grid lines. And I had to be careful not to get glue on the top, because if you get glue on the top, it's extremely hard to draw your grid lines. So that's going to be our next move. grid lines right over top of my monkey, or right over top of your image. This is where your ruler comes in handy. And I want to be able to see the grid lines on either the left or the right, and also the top and the bottom to make sure that I'm being accurate. Now, I oftentimes will ask students to try this out with their ruler before even working on top of their image. Just draw yourself 2 tiny points, and I want you to try to connect them with your ruler and then draw the line. So just as a quick experiment for you, I would encourage you to try this in case you don't use a ruler regularly. And my lines are touching there, or my points are touching there, touching the ruler, and I'll complete my line. If you notice, your line is pretty darn close. It definitely connects the points, but it looks like it's shifted a little bit to the right. We have to account for that when we're using a ruler. When this pencil runs across the edge of my ruler, it moves just the tiniest hair, maybe even just a millimeter, maybe even less, but I know that it impacts sometimes our accuracy and the way our grid will look when it's done. So let's go ahead and be careful about that. I'm going to use my ruler here. I'm going to try to connect the top of the vertical lines to the bottom vertical lines here. And I'm going to try to complete the grid right over top of my monkey friend. And again, I'm trying to be very careful with this. I'm trying to be as accurate as possible so that I don't shift things out of proportion when I go to enlarge my image. And I'm guessing this is getting pretty dull to watch, but I don't know how to fast forward in my video. So you can fast forward if you've had enough of this. We're almost there, at least with our vertical grid. Looks pretty good. Now I want to make sure that I complete the grid going the opposite direction, so working horizontally or going parallel here to the x-axis, moving up the y-axis, perhaps you would say. I'm worried about that little bumper there. There we go. So again, I can't really fast forward, but I do know how to pause. So in a second, I'll be back and my monkey hopefully will be ready to roll. So here we are. My monkey has officially completed the grid, right? So the grid over top of the monkey happens both going horizontally and vertically in all spaces or directions. This is exactly what we want to see. The next thing I want you to consider is labeling your x and your y axis. We're actually going to number them off. So we put the star here. We said it's kind of like the origin. It's kind of like 0, 0, but it's tricky for me to write a quick 0, 0 there. It takes up a little bit of space. So instead, I'm just going to skip to the next interval, and I'm going to call this 1 and 2 and 3, and it's fine to count by ones in this situation. In fact, I would strongly encourage you to, until you get past the important pieces of your image. So for me, I can stop at this 9 mark because I see the whole monkey would be included if I went out here just to the 9th interval. I also have to do the same thing working in the other direction. Always a good idea that when you're working on paper, you're allowed to turn this. Not so easy to do if I'm working directly on the Promethean. So today you get to see my hand and my movement, and it kind of works out that way. So starting at the origin, moving up the y-axis, this would be 1. This would be 2 and 3 and 4. And 5 and 6 and 7, and I want to make sure that I leave enough intervals to cover the whole image. So it looks like I have to go up to 8 here. You're really ready. You have enough information to get yourself started with an enlargement, but the next decision is deciding on the scale. So if you notice, I have an image that is 9 by 8, 9 by 8, and that's going to be really important to me in a minute. So I'm just going to write 9 by 8 on the bottom here, something to think about. These are measured in centimeters, so I might label that centimeters. And we'll just kind of store that information for a quick minute. This next slide brings me to deciding on scale. So again, thinking about scale and how can I maximize the space? How can I really enlarge my image to make it interesting or to make it the largest possible? So first I need to determine how many units in each direction, and I've done that. I did that with my monkey a minute ago and I wrote down 9 by 8. Behind here I have another example that we'll look at, and this is actually 8 by 7. So I can really base it on my own personal image and what the dimensions are moving from left to right and then moving vertically also up and down the y-axis. I might want to consider doubling my measurements. That's sometimes my first thought. And if that doesn't work, then I have to revise my plan. Or sometimes even if that does work, I want to revise my plan and think a little bit larger if possible. I want you to think on paper before starting. And you might even think with a partner and make sure that you're both in agreement before you actually get your grid enlarged and on paper. It's easier to make the changes before it's permanent. Next, it says precision matters, so I do want you to be precise in this activity. Well, here's my example. I want to go from 8 by 7 centimeters, and I have a paper that's in inches. I can move up to 24 inches by 18 inches if I wanted to. So to think about that, I hope I made a next slide here. We'll take a peek. I didn't, so let's go back. I know that I could take 8 and I could multiply it by 3. 8 times 3 would definitely get me 24. So what that would mean is I would make every single interval 3 inches wide. So that's one possibility. But that works going this direction, doesn't it? 8 times 3 is 24. But what about the other direction? What's 7 times 3? Hopefully you'd say 21, and you'd notice that this goes off the charts. That's too big. So multiplying by 3 here is not a good move. Maybe instead I could just double the measurements. So instead of having 8 of something, I could have 16. Instead of having 7 units, I could make it 14. I definitely could fit 14 moving vertically and 16 moving horizontally, so that's a good possibility. But then I start to ask myself other things. What if I really tried to maximize the space? Would 2.5 work? Could that be my scale factor? And it is possible. Okay? It is possible to use that for some images. So let's talk it through. 2.5 times 8. Well, 2 times 8 is 16, plus a half of 8 is 4 more. That would get me 20. That would use 20 inches going this direction. If I made every single interval 2.5 inches, that's a possibility. But would it work going vertically? Well, what's 2.5 or 2.5 times 7? Well, 2 times 7 is 14, and half of 7 is 3.5 more. So 14 plus 3.5 would be 17.5. That would fit almost perfectly going vertically. So that's a good possibility. Maybe my scale factor will be 2.5. Every 2.5 inches, I would make a mark on my enlargement, and that's how I would start my enlarged grid. Here's another example. Here's a giraffe that I was taking a peek at, and I just made an imaginary grid over top of it, and I wanted to point out for you that his image moves 14 to the right and 19 high. So I'm starting with 14 units by 19 units. And I'm sorry you can hear my friend Grizzly in the background. He's talking for you a little bit. He's a little bit jealous that I'm talking to you and not him. Well, if I take this 14 by 19, I could definitely move in inches, couldn't I? I could enlarge it and just change my centimeters to inches in scale. So 1 inch would definitely work. I'd use 14 inches going to the right and 19 inches moving upward or vertically. So that's a possibility. But that's pretty dull. In fact, it doesn't make me think a whole lot about math or maximizing space. So what about doubling the dimensions? What's 14 doubled? Well, you'd say 28, wouldn't you? And no matter which one I look at here, if I'm going to talk about inches, I can't get to 28 inches using my maximum size of paper. So let's not try times 2. But maybe I could try something in the middle. Would 1.5 work? Well, here I'd have to say, what's 1.5 times 14? Well, 1 times 14 is 14, and half of 14 is 7 more. That would be 21. So 21 moving this direction. Let's try the other direction. What's 1.5 times 19? Well, 1 times 19 is 19, and half of 19 is, oops, I did say that right, and half of 19 is 8.5. So 19 plus 8.5 is 27.5. Oh, darn, that one goes off the charts also. So for this one, I really think this idea of either moving to 1 inch might be a good idea, or maybe we should think differently. Maybe we should think metrically. So let's talk about this next. So again, I suggested that we think differently. Maybe we think with a metric system. I would have 45 centimeters by 61 centimeters approximately on the biggest paper that I'm giving you to work with. So if that's the case, well, I have my dimensions in the same order. The smaller dimension by the larger dimension. The smaller, oops, that's wrong. This is actually, we said 14 by 19. So the smaller dimension by the larger dimension. So this is what we're starting with, and we're going to try to think of it in a different way if we want to, maybe with metrics. So I'm thinking, is there a way to go from 14 to 45. And in fact, you could try something like long division really quickly, and you could see if 14 goes in there. Well, there are no 14 tens in 45, but there are definitely groups of 14 in 45. Here, if I multiplied, I could try, well, 4 times that would be too much, 56. So what about 3? 3 times 4 is 12, and we regroup the 1. 3 tens is the same as 30 plus 1 more. That'd make 42. And when you subtract, there's 3 left over. So could I instead do something like this? I noticed that I'd get, oops, it's exactly, by the way, I'd get exactly 3 3/14 centimeters. No one wants to measure 3/14 of a centimeter, but maybe 3 centimeters wouldn't be a bad idea. 3 centimeters might just be a good interval for me to work with. So that means that I would also have to be able to check and see if I could take 19 times 3 and not exceed 61 centimeters. So I'm just thinking to myself, 19 times 3. Here, 3 times 9 is 27. So 27 ones, I get to keep a group of 7 of them and regroup the 2 tens here. 3 times 10 is actually 30, plus 2 more tens makes 50. I have 57 to work with, 57 centimeters to use up. Is that a possibility? Yes, and yes, this is going to work. So if I were you in this situation, I would say that I'm going to move from an original 1 centimeter to a scale of 3 centimeters. So this might be a better way for you to think if you want to stick in the metric system and really want to try to maximize your space. Let's take a look at another. So here I have that fabulous unicorn. If you notice, I measured out, I wrote here 8 by 10, so let's make sure that that's true. So you should have a star in the bottom left corner, you should have crowded the corner with your image, and you counted it out here, your intervals. Yep, there's definitely 10 intervals moving to the right. Next, you count moving upwards. Oh, gotta make sure we have the tippy top of the unicorn. So it looks like 8 units works out. So I have this 8 by 10, or actually I could call it a 10 by 8. I guess either one would be accurate. Well, could I measure in an inch? Could I go from 1 centimeter, the centimeter grid, up to inches? Well, sure. This could be centimeters, and I could convert it to 8 inches by 10 inches. If I choose to, I definitely have enough space working with an 18 by 24 inch paper. But the question is, could I make it more interesting? Could I make it larger? Well, could we double both dimensions? Well, what is 2 times 8? You'd say 16, right? So you'd use up 16 inches. What is 2 times 10? Well, you would say 20. Do I have enough to make that happen? Yep, if you look at your dimensions of your larger paper, I have an 18 by 24. So 16 by 20 definitely fits on that. But could I get bigger than that yet? What if I tried times 3? So I take my original dimensions, my 8 and my 10 units, and I triple them. Well, 8 tripled is 24, and 10 tripled is 30. If you notice, and I compare this to my original paper, my huge enlargement paper, I go off the charts. That's not going to work. Oops, and this won't let me cross off, but I am trying for you. So 3 is no go. But hey, 2 wasn't bad, and it left me some excess. In fact, I have 2 extra inches to work with, going in one direction, and 4 extra to go in the other direction. So I wonder if I could try 2.5 instead. Well, let's talk about that. What's 2.5 times 8? 2 times 8 is 16, plus half of 8, which is 4. That would use up 20 inches. That doesn't sound too bad. What if I took this 2.5 times 10? Well, 2 times 10 is 20, and half of 10 is 5 more, so I'd use up 25 inches. Do you have enough paper in the enlarged paper that you've been given to do a 20 by 25? The answer is no. So that 25 inches is going to go off the charts, which means that in one direction I'm going to lose part of my unicorn. It was a good try, but 2.5 won't work. Maybe 2.25 would, but I wasn't going to go there next. The next thing I was going to ask you to consider was thinking metrically. So some of you will want to stick in a metric system. You want to try something different that maybe you haven't thought of before. So I told you a moment ago that the maximum paper size is 45 centimeters by 61 centimeters approximately. So I just did my measuring of that huge paper. Instead of in inches, I thought of it as a metric unit or label. Well, is there a way to go from an 8 by 10 unit object to 45 by 61 somehow, or to get closer. Well, could we take that 45 and see how many times 8 goes in there? Hopefully you'd recognize 8 goes into 45 5 times, because 5 times 8 is 40, with 5 parts left over. So it goes in there 5 5/8 times. It looks like I could use 5 centimeters as one of my intervals. Every 5 centimeters I'll make a tick mark, if that will work also for the 10. Well, what's 10 times 5? You would say 50. So is there enough room for me to use this idea of every 5 centimeters? I would end up using 40 centimeters by, what did we say? 5 times that? 50 centimeters. So yep, that would work. 5 centimeters is a possibility. But could we make it even larger? Would 5.5 be possible? Well, it's really, really looking like it, because 5/8 is a little bit bigger than 1/2, isn't it? So half of 8 is 4, and half of 10 is 5. I know that this is slightly bigger than 1/2, and I know that 5.5 is exactly halfway between 5 and 6 centimeters. So I'm thinking that this would probably be a go, and I'll show you how to work with that in a moment. So now let's talk about how to enlarge our grid. So I'm going to think back to my monkey for a quick minute. My monkey, what I decided to do here, to go from a 9 by 8 to some number of inches. I just need to jot this down so I don't forget. A 9 by 8 to some number of inches. Well, I have a 24 by 18 to work with. So we said that maybe I could double them both. I could take both of them times 2. I'd get 18 units by 16 units, and that would definitely fit. So times 2 might be possible. Did we say 2.5 would work? I just want to double check that. 2 times 9 was 18 plus half more. 18 plus 4.5. 22.5, I think, in my head. So it sounds like 2.5 might work going that direction. What about 2.5 going this direction? Well, 2 times 8 is 16 plus half more. That'd be 20. So do I have 20 inches to work with going this direction? No. I've decided I'm going to use a scale of times 2. I'm going to use a scale of 2 inches, if you will. So I want you to break out your ruler at this point, and I want you to really tune into that bottom edge. Let's see if I can pivot this at all. I was afraid this might happen. That bottom left corner, we're going to anchor everything there to the origin, and we're going to line up my ruler as close as I can there. And we said that we're going to mark every 2 inches to start my grid. I'm using a 2-inch scale, so I'm going to put a tick mark at every 2 inches. So starting here at the bottom left corner where I have my star, I'm going to move over 2 inches and put a tick mark. Oops, it's not really letting me. I wish I was closer to the 2. You should be as precise as you can. Next I'm going to move over 2 more inches. So 1, 2 more inches, and I'm going to put a tick mark. Come on, pen. Okay. Next I'm going to try again, move over 2 more inches and put a tick mark. You may have to take this ruler and slide it along. You may have to try to shift it to find the next interval of 2 inches, for instance. Oops. This is extremely hard to line up. I think you'll have better luck with the real live ruler. And make a tick mark. I also have to do this at the top of my paper. So the next thing I would do is I would take my awesome measuring device. I would make sure that the 0 is lined up with the very top edge of my paper. And notice I'm anchoring it still to this left-hand side. It's anchored to the left, the side of the origin. And next I'm going to measure over every 2 inches and put a tick mark. Tick mark. Uh-oh. Looks like I have to move my ruler down, and that just didn't work terribly well, did it? So next I'm going to put a tick mark at every 2 inches. 2 inches. Can't see it back there very well. 4 inches, I see. 6 inches. And I'm going to continue that idea. When I'm done, you should have these perfectly aligned measures that are going to allow you to take your ruler or your measuring device, shift it this direction, and complete the line. So I can't promise that it's going to let me do that nicely because I'm working on a board, and it looks like it won't let me draw really, really close to my ruler. So I'm going to try to show you in another way. I'm going to try to show you real life with my video. So here I tried to set up for you my enlarged paper or my enlargement paper, and I have either a meter stick or a yardstick. The end of it's taped, so I can't promise without looking. But I'm going to start measuring over every 2 inches, and notice that I need to make sure that this is aligned with the very edge of my paper. So I'm getting as close as I can, and I'm following the bottom left, from the bottom left corner, where you probably want a star marking your origin. Every 2 inches I'm putting a tick mark. And that's only because we decided that for my image, I could use 2-inch squares safely. I did not think of mine metrically. I probably could have, but I just know that I need 2-inch grids to make my image fit. So I'm going to work all the way over here to the edge. Every 2 inches I'm going to put a tick mark. Now for me to complete this accurately, I also need to grab the top edge, and I'm still starting from the left hand side, so I'm still focusing in on the origin side, and I'm going to measure over every 2 inches and make a tick mark. Grizzly, why are you crying for the kids? That's not nice. Okay, every 2 inches we're going to make a tick mark. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, and 24 takes me pretty much to the edge. I now have 2 beautiful guides, one at the bottom, one at the top, that I'm going to try to connect to carefully. So I'm trying to line up my ruler as close as I can, remembering that whenever I draw the pencil down the edge of a ruler, or a yardstick in this case, that sometimes it bumps the line just the tiniest little hair, so I want to account for that. And I'm going to use a straight edge every single time, and I'm aligning a tick mark at the top and at the bottom as closely as I can. Okay, so fast forward a few minutes have passed, and I've been busy working on my vertical grid lines. But these don't make a grid yet, these just make vertical lines. And if you take a peek over at this edge, I don't know if I can get you there so that you can see it with Ziggy or not. I stopped when I got to the 9th interval because my image stops after 9. I don't have to draw anymore, I don't have to draw 10, 11. This is all going to be excess paper over here. Now it also depends on how well you did with your enlargement. Maybe you won't have a lot of excess to trim off, which is perfect. So if you can think of a metric system, something that will work a little bit better for you so that you can maximize the paper, that's perfect. Well, I've taken care of my verticals. I also have to take care of horizontals. But remember, this bottom left corner is the magic. This is where I have to start everything. This bottom left is my anchor. So I'm going to use this measuring device again. I'm going to line it up as close as I can to the edge here. And every 2 inches, because I'm using a 2-inch scale for my enlargement, I'm going to put a tick mark. The smaller your tick mark, probably the more accurate. It's almost like making a point, if you will. If you don't make a point, or you make the tick mark too large, when you go to connect it, you're more likely to use a different part of the tick mark and go slightly zigzaggy or off what you would like to be. Well, this is great. I have tick marks on the left. Now I have students that automatically will start trying to line this up. But if they're going to be going downhill or uphill, it's almost guaranteed. So I would say don't do that. Instead, we move to the opposite side. I'm going to turn my paper so that I can try to show you here. On the opposite side, I want to make sure that I still start on that origin corner. So I'm going to show you my star is here. I'm still on the origin corner. Okay? So I'm still referencing that anchor edge every single time. And I'm going to start counting over 2 inches and making tick marks every single time because my scale is in 2s. Okay, I'm not sure you'll find it super exciting, but the next move would be for me to connect each tick mark from opposite edges. So I'm going to try to line this up for you just to give you a good example. Notice that I'm working the opposite direction this time. So I'm going to be making my horizontals for my image. And I want to be careful here that I get as close to those tick marks as I can so that my image is very, very accurate and precise. I'll do a couple with you and then I'll fast forward, or at least pause my video so you don't have to stare at me while I do it, and maybe you can work on some of yours. Okay, I'm returning to my video here, and if you can take a look, I have completed my grid in both a horizontal and a vertical direction. I'm back to my anchor corner being in my bottom left. That's the origin. And I really have to number this off, similar to my monkey picture. I need to number each of those lines. And I have students every year that like to label smack dab in the middle of that box, as opposed to labeling the interval. And that's pretty dangerous. It'll definitely make it very hard for you to graph in a little bit. So I'm just counting up. Hard to see here, but I put a 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 9 because I need 9 intervals going to the right. Next, I need to make sure that I count all the way up in my intervals. I'm writing these numbers on the line or as close to the line as I can get, not in the middle of the boxes. So I'm using this kind of like a y-axis. This would be 1 and 2 and 3 and so on. You're really ready for the next move, which is to find some critical points. And when I say critical, I really mean I want you to take a close look here and see where some definite intersections are that would be helpful. So the way I plop this down here, I see that there's a great intersection smack dab on his mouth. So I'm going to try to exaggerate that point a little bit. In fact, maybe I would even write it in color. I'm going to see if I can find any other good intersections. So I'm looking around here. I notice right here there's an intersection real close to the white of his eye. Looking for another good intersection. I'm trying to find myself maybe 5 or 6 to get started. Oh, this one's really good right here. Kind of near his chin. Notice I'm trying to find a point where the image itself overlaps right at an intersection of my grid lines. Ooh, here's another one. So currently I have 1, 2, 3, 4 important points. I wonder if I can find a 5th one. Oh yeah, right here next to his ear. That's definitely at a nice intersection. Those are going to be my starting points. So I don't know if you can see those very well. Maybe I should zoom in a little bit. Grizzy, are you showing off for the kids? Okay. I'll let you look at Grizzly real quick because he seems like he wants to say hi. Hi, Grizz. Hi, buddy. Grizzy, speak. Okay. Well, enough about your brain break. Time to return to our scale drawing. So if you can see here, I have actually found some critical points, some important intersections where my image crosses right at those grid lines perfectly. I want to start plotting those points. So think of it as an x and a y axis. Here's a point at 3, 1. So I want to plot 3, 1 on my coordinate plane or on my enlargement. The next point I'm going to plot is over here. So this is way over here at 7, up 3. So 7, 3 will also have a point at it. Will be a good starting point for me to draw. I also notice a point here next to his eye. That's over 3 and it's up 4. So I'm going to plot 3, 4 for his eye. I also found a point over here which is next to his ear. So that's over 7 and it's up 5. So 7, 5. And I thought I had another one, so I'm going to dig around here. Oh, yep, right here next to dragoart.com. There's a point here at 7, 2. 7, 2. And I'm just recording my coordinates so that I can keep track of them. So first point at 3, 1. I start at the corner. I move over 3 to the right, 1 up, and I put a small point here. Okay, I'm starting to make my enlargement. And the more points I can find, the more accurate I will be. Next, I need to plot 3, 4, we said, so I'm already at the 3 mark. I need to move up 4. So the intersection of 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm kind of off the charts for you, but here it is. There's that point that's next to his eye. 3, 4. Next, I'm going to look for the point 7, 2, so I move out here to 7. And I move up 2. 7, 2, and I put a point. This is where it's very important that your axis for the x and the axis for the y, your axes are labeled correctly. Next I need 7, 3. That was the point that was near his mouth. And the last point I was able to find to get me started was 7, 5. 4, 5. That's a beautiful starting point. That's pretty awesome because I was able to find 5 nice intersections. Now I would encourage you to go back to your image, whatever it is, and see if you can find any others. So in this case, you might be looking for half marks, something that lands halfway, or another nice intersection. Here's another nice intersection near his other eye, which I didn't catch earlier. So these are all set. I might cross them off my list. And next I'm going to try to find this point for his eye. This one's pretty darn close. I might include this one also, if you notice, right about here. It's kind of along his mask. It's kind of along that line of his mask. So I found myself 2 more nice points. Now I mentioned to you half points. Right about here, this looks like a halfway point, and it's part of his eye, isn't it? It's halfway between these horizontals. So this might be a good point also to work with. Trying to find some other nice halves or intersections. Ooh, look at this, intersection of his ear. There's another good one. Oh, another intersection of his ear. That ear is going to come together quickly. I have a lot of points on it already. So let's go ahead and try to graph maybe 3 to 5 more points that we hadn't considered yet. So for the first one, I'm going to graph 1, 2. So I'm going to move over here 1 and up 2. I'm on his ear. Next I'm going to move 1, 4. 1, 4 is kind of near the top of his ear from my monkey image. And I'm going to continue doing this idea until I have all kinds of critical points labeled. So I'm trying to get maybe 12, 15, 20 of them. The more you have, the more accurate you will be. I think I missed a couple others. This mask we talked about, this is over 4 and up 6. So 4, 6. I'll see if I can find that for us really fast. So 4 over, 6 up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I have a dog that's being really bad. He's part monkey, perhaps. Okay. I also found another spot on his, let's see here. Oh, I was going to say on his ear, but I think we had that one before. Did we get the one by his eye? Oh, that halfway mark. Remember we talked about this halfway mark? It was over 4 and up 3.5. So over 4 and up 3.5. 1, 2, 3.5. I'm going to put a little mark here. I have a lot of important points to get myself started. So now the question is, how do I begin? Well, I find one of those critical points and I start kind of sketching. So for me, I see that this ear is kind of coming together already. It already has 2 important points on it. So I also see that this ear almost passes the halfway right here. It's over 1/2, up 3. So over 1/2, up 3. This ear needs to touch right about here. So I'm going to try to start from this point and round it similar to what I see in my picture. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not. Will it be pretty close when I'm done? I bet. Next I have to go from this and kind of arc it down to get the other underside of his ear happening here. And as I move along, I notice that this next line dips down into the next box and doesn't quite come back up to the intersection. So it dips down and it comes back up underneath the intersection. So maybe I try something along this line. Oh, you know what? I also noticed, if you take a peek here, this is kind of over 1 1/2, up 1 1/2. So over 1 1/2, up 1 1/2. Maybe if I can touch this point along the way, I'll have a good monkey ear started. Oh, this one kind of looks like it's over 2 1/3 and up about 2 1/2. So over 2 1/3, up 2 1/2. This is where his ear needs to come in. Now, if you take a look, my monkey ear is definitely not perfect. It's really looking sketchy at this point, and that's totally fine. When I'm done, I can come back in and I can refine it, or I can darken it in and marker. I can make it look a little bit nicer. I'm also being a little bit exaggerated with my lines tonight. I'm drawing my grids pretty darn dark. I'm also drawing my monkey ear pretty darn dark. Okay, I'm doing that just so that you can see it with the camera. You may want to use a lighter touch until you're sure you've got it. Let's see. I also notice over here, if I move down to this point, I was at 3, 1, and that is connected to his ear. That's connected to that last point that I just put on. So I think I should be able to kind of dip this out here and try to connect to this last point. And again, I'm being a little bit sketchy as I go. It's not going to be perfect, but I'm trying to get it to be as detailed as possible. I'm not sure if I'm loving it. I may have to come in and do a touch-up. In fact, I feel like maybe this should have connected here instead. It's not bad, okay? We'll come back and touch it up if we need to. I also see now that he's got his mask. His mask is kind of coming up and it's cutting this into thirds. Right here, I noticed that this mask is kind of cutting this into thirds, so I'm going to try to cut this into thirds. His mask needs to touch right about here, and then it comes back in. It comes into the next box and cuts in another one. So I'm really watching my image a little bit, or I could try to plot some more points so that I could be more accurate with it. I also see that his chinny chin chin comes down here and it kind of dips below these next two boxes very, very mildly. So barely comes down here. Two boxes. Oops, that's not two, that's one box. Two boxes, okay? And I can tell by looking at this that I probably should use my eraser, and I probably should try to make that look a little more rounded. So maybe I'm going to have to shift it a tiny bit. I like that a little bit better, okay? Is it coming together immediately? No. Will it take some practice and some refining? Absolutely, and that's what I expect you to do. And again, the more points, the better. Well, I could come over here and I could say, oh, well, this was another piece of his chinny chin chin, so I need to get from here to there in a nice smooth arc. So I'm going to try to keep doing that from here to here in a nice smooth arc. Grizzy, what's wrong? Okay. I could take a peek here then, and I'm sorry for all the ums and all the distractions, but next I'm going to try to find another location to start or to work. So maybe I would work again on another point until it starts to come together. So up here, I see that this was where I was going to make the white of his eye, which kind of comes up and kind of dips down. And right now, we're in a racetrack. Wrong dog. Grizzly's running in circles. All right. This is just to get you started. I don't know how far you will get while you're working on this in day one, but we'll continue to come back to it and add more details and maybe erase and do a little more curved lines in my situation to make it look as close as possible when we're done. Just checking in after kind of working on this for a little bit. So again, I started with those important points, those critical points, and I started to piece things together. And you can see I have a lot of eraser shavings here. I'm reworking, refining, and I don't have the whole thing drawn. I'm not just starting on the outside. I'm kind of working on different sections until it starts to come together. So I feel like when I look at his ear here, I feel like I'm still off a little bit. I maybe made it a little too rounded and too wide. I already erased it once. So I might have to dig in here and try to find more accurate points or try to narrow it down a little bit more than what I've done so. I also thought that it dipped down here a little bit more, and I'm kind of fighting with that. So there's a little bit more that I can do to make it a little bit more accurate. It's just going to take some practice. I've reworked the eye a couple times. I started with that white, and then I noticed that the dark actually attached right there to the outside of his eye in my image. So I'm trying to duplicate that. And I'm using still those critical points. I'm not just drawing freehand. So I'm really looking at every single box and seeing, okay, which direction does it go? Does it slice the box in thirds or halves or fourths? Because that helps me kind of predict where to put that line or how to get that sketched in. I'm pretty happy with the way his mouth and his chin are kind of coming together here. His nose and his nostrils, that was a challenge too. And you can see I don't work with real solid lines. I kind of make it sketchy until I feel like I've got the one I want. And then I'll come back in and erase or just darken the ones that I like best. So I want you to take this idea. Hi, Grizzly. And I want you to give it your best. I want you to continue finding some critical points. Just taking this in sections and chunks, and we're going to work on it for a few days to make it our best. You don't have to be an artist. You just have to really dissect the different grids, the different parts of your project to be able to do it well. I'm sorry for rocking tables and wild dogs. But anyway, that's it for scale drawing to get you started. We'll come back and talk about the reflection another time.